listeners and friends of the festival, welcome to Off-Screen with OFFA, the Oakville Festival's Film and Arts brand new podcast featuring the creative voices behind this year's festival films. My name is Maddie, and I will be your host for this week's very first episode, with two key members of the cast and crew of American Desert, a film which will be having its Canadian premiere at this year's 2021 festival on June 29th. Director Adrian Bartol and lead actor Will Brandt join me from the west coast of the United States to discuss the film, which centers on Matt, a veteran of Afghanistan who finds himself entangled in a dangerous web of drugs, violence, and toxic love that eventually has him running and hiding for his life. We had a fantastic conversation about this drama, with both Adrian and Will providing some insights into how they brought this story to the screen. Take a listen. So welcome, gentlemen, to Off-Screen with OFFA, and thank you so much for joining me for today's podcast, which, as we've kind of discussed in our little preamble before, is our very first episode of the podcast, and we're so glad to be kicking it off with you and this very rich and daring film, which made its world premiere at the Brooklyn Film Festival this year and will be screening with us for this year's 2021 festival. So Adrian, maybe I'll start things off with you. What in particular drew you to this story, and was there an individual or an experience that inspired the film's inception?
From a personal standpoint, I grew up in San Diego, California, and you probably know that's a town with a pretty strong military presence.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was a kid, when my mom went like shopping at Safeway, she'd let me kind of roam around the parking lot, and there was these benches. And there was, of course, homeless people. It's a big problem in the US, as you probably know. And I would just kind of talk to them. And many of them were veterans from the Vietnam War. And other than the scars from that experience, they seem to have no other psychological issues. So ever since that time, I was kind of very fascinated. And also in LA, once I went to LA many years later, I had a bunch of friends that had seen combat, that were in the military in some respect or another, and seen actual combat. And they also had this kind of very unique energy to them. And that really, really interested me. And I thought it was something I wanted to explore kind of in a fictional way with my first film.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, all of these characters are very poignant, and they each have their own very complex tales that kind of have formed them. And I was also wondering, the cast is such a huge part of bringing those roles to life. All of the cast seemed so perfect for those roles, particularly Will. You did a fantastic job. Ruby Modine and Michael Ironside. I was wondering if you could tell me about the casting process for the film, maybe from both of your perspectives.
It was actually the most difficult thing, I think, to realize the project. It was in fact so difficult that Will and I just basically in the beginning went to the desert and just filmed all the scenes, because as you know, a large portion of the movie is only Will in the desert, and we just basically shot all of that before we were able to get any casting, because it was very, very, very difficult. But then suddenly, like a window opened and people started being interested, maybe because they'd seen some of the footage that we'd already done, or maybe the script got to a level where they really wanted to join. And then it just kind of magically happened. But at first it was incredibly difficult. So, it's one of those lessons in persistence. You just keep going. You have this idea of this dream. Will and I just kept chipping away at it until, magically we got again, this was a movie that was made with almost no money. And to think that we have someone as brilliant and well recognized as Michael Ironside, Rob Losardo, Calvin Blue, it's pretty amazing.
For sure. Will, what about you from your perspective? How did casting work, and also what drew you to this role and this character who undergoes a very difficult transformation throughout the film, but clearly also goes through a very difficult transformation throughout his experiences in combat? How did you approach unfolding someone who is clearly so layered?
I think the challenge of trying to encapsulate and portray all of that is the thing that attracted me to this the most. It's also the thing that freaked me out the most. And I really learned through doing and making this with Adrian that for me, I think as an actor and being involved in films, if it really, scares me to death, that's kind of the place that I like to be in, because that's where, that's where it pushes you the most. My dad is in the military as well. So when it came to playing a fictionalized combat veteran, I was acutely aware that I have no idea what it's like to go into combat. So, and you can't go into combat as a research project as an actor, of course. You only have your imagination and what tools are before you. So I just threw myself into an intense amount of research, a lot of reading, of whatever I could get my hands on from stuff guys had written that had just come back, and their experiences, a lot of YouTube helmet cam footage on repeat for months with headphones on. And then I was able to talk to some vets, and I feel just incredibly grateful to those guys that were willing to open themselves up and share some of their experiences with me, because I don't think that this would have been really possible without those contributions. And I'm just incredibly grateful to those guys that were willing to do that, because it's certainly not easy for someone to share things like that. And that really helped in coloring Matt's experience, or what it might be like for someone like Matt. And then just like Adrian said, we shot this in kind of pieces. And so the ability to spend time in those locations was extremely helpful in building Matt's experience, I think. And to your point about the casting process, it was just it was a lot of learning. It was really difficult. I was in a class at the time, like kind of a theater workshop thing, and there were some folks that joined on from that. Once I was kind of talking to them about what we were doing and showing people footage. It was a lot of trial and error of filming and trying things out, and then the script and story changed a bit in that process. And then, like Adrian said, people came on board as they kind of saw what we were doing, and I think maybe the script started to resonate with folks. And yeah, it was not easy, the casting process, but we got incredibly lucky. I never thought that we would have folks like this on board. So. To help us realize this vision.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, I think all of the players are so great, and I think that you guys did an incredible job bringing this very worthwhile story to the screen. Yeah, Adrian, maybe tell us from your perspective about working with Will and the other actors as a director, and how you get such amazing performances from each actor. What are some of your strategies for facilitating that collaboration?
Will is actually a very close friend of mine, and we've been friends for many, many years. And I think that was a great advantage. The main thing with Will that I was like, because, of course I have a bunch of other friends in LA that are actors, but I was like, Will is absolutely the person to do this project with, because not only is it going to be shot in an incredibly difficult environment, it's also incredibly challenging material. And Will is like one of the most persistent people that I know, if not the most persistent. And that was the essential element for this project. And the main thing with him was that he was willing to go into the desert, because the landscape really influences a person's performance and really forces them to enter this kind of irony of claustrophobia, because you are in the most vast expanse imaginable. Yet the whole idea of the film is to make it incredibly claustrophobic, and you really want to escape from this entrapment that you have. So yeah, and also with Will, we had all the time in the world, and that was amazing, because we could really try things out, and we're such good friends that we can criticize each other and we don't take it the wrong way. And we both grew tremendously as Will as an actor and I as a director. And it was an incredible privilege to have that opportunity to just experiment with ideas and not feel judged or rushed or feel like you didn't know what you're doing. And with the other actors, I mean, they're incredibly brilliant in my opinion. And Michael Ironside, I feel, immediately understood the character. And Ruby also had like this natural understanding. But with them also placing them in the desert, filming it in a very remote town, really made them understand like how isolated and how claustrophobic these people must feel. Because as a person who lives in a major city or even in a small city, you'd be like, why don't these people escape the situation? You know, that's the question that one would have throughout the film. But in this very tiny little community, and we actually saw it firsthand in these tiny little communities in the desert, it's very difficult to escape these vortexes of drug use. And I think that was very useful for them not to feel like they were playing like these cartoon characters, like they were just too exaggerated. You know, like these are stories that do happen every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And jumping off too of your kind of point of stories happening every day. I mean, without spoiling anything, the ending is somewhat open-ended, and I'm curious what motivated you wanting to keep it open and to keep the audience thinking.
My main motivation for that, because there was a version of it where it was very clear what happens in that scene, and I made the decision to leave it open-ended because drug abuse, and particularly opioid consumption, is a huge problem, and a lot of people hopefully will get to see this movie. And for many people, that story ends in tragedy, and for many people, that story ends in happiness. So I didn't want to force, you know, a specific outcome there. I wanted a person who experienced tragedy to be able to sort of like heal by watching it. Because in that scene, you know, it could potentially end in tragedy, and also someone that experienced, you know, that same thing, but the person was able to recover, to be able to also kind of like, you know, have that experience without it, you know. That was my priority, so people would identify people watching it, because it is a very real thing, you know, and a lot of people, I mean, myself included, have had friends, family members that have passed away from drug overdoses, etc. So
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very significant issue, and I think it's fantastic that you're bringing it to light and able to discuss so many nuanced issues in this film. Also, kind of launching off of the fact that this is an independent film, and it is one that is so, you know, it is very daring. It really pushes the envelope a little bit. What was it like making this as an independent film, and how many years did you spend raising money to make the film?
well, actually, I don't think it could have been made if it wasn't completely like absolutely micro budget independent. We actually had to use all our own money, and basically my strategy was, well, all these things that cost money, I'm just going to learn how to do them, because I knew that if I went out and tried to get money for a project like this, people would just be like, no, man, it's too dark. That ending is too much. You know, it's like, it deals, you know, there's not, you know, but that's, difficult conversations are the most important conversations, I think.
Absolutely.
And it's very difficult to get financing for a difficult conversation, because it doesn't lead to profits. No one wants to go and like, oh, just be reminded of this very, like, all these strong issues that our society faces. So that was basically my strategy: learn how to edit, learn how to color correct, learn how to operate a camera, learn everything I could about sound, all of that stuff. And so I could just push the budget down so much, I could put all the money into the actors, and the rest just figure it out, you know. And that was basically my strategy.
No, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. And I mean, I think you guys pull it together in a fantastic way. I suppose my last question would be, if both of you could maybe name some filmmakers or even some actors who are inspirations for you, maybe just in general or even specifically for this film.
I think for me, right now, Denis Villeneuve is, I may be screwing up his last name. The guy that does Blade Runner, and he did Prisoners, and all those movies. I absolutely love everything that he does, and that's just kind of, he's just kind of a favorite director of mine. I love the way that he does things. But then also on the other end of the spectrum, I love Terrence Malick's movies, and there's a that's a hard question to answer, I think.
It's always the question people from film school like dread. It's like, name the films you like, and you're like, total blank. But
yeah, I think it depends kind of on the mood that you're in. But yeah.
For sure. Adrian, what about you?
For me, I think Ron is a inspiration because he has this natural tendency to be interested in these kind of outsider story, or like it just kind of like like you see the world in a certain way, and then he goes beyond that layer of like how everything is structured, and also very interested in telling stories like about outsiders, and kind of making them feel very lived in, and like like being very empathic about them. Another director, I can't remember her name because it's like a very complicated name. It's like the woman who directed Olivia. I'm not if you're familiar with that film, and a bunch of other films which are great masterpieces, I thought. Again, that same idea of a person with a very complicated kind of like, very, in other directors would not be able to make you feel so empathic about such a complicated outsider. And she's also one of those directors that's able to just make you empathize with the person and just kind of like really be interested in their life story and see kind of their perspective. So those are kind of, I mean, amongst many others, obviously, but those are the two that just kind of popped to mind.
Oh, for sure. And I think certainly in the aspect of empathy, I empathize with the majority of the characters in your film. I felt that, you definitely accomplished that in American Desert. So maybe minus Michael Ironside's character, but I think for sure, I mean, Ruby's character and Will's character, it was such a great film, and I'm so glad you guys could join us today, and I'm so excited to see this film be screening at our online festival this year. So thank you so much, gentlemen, and I hope you have a great day, and go catch your flight, Adrian. I hope you get there on time.
Awesome. All right, well, thanks so much, Maddie, and thanks again for hosting us at the OFFA Festival. We're very excited to be a part of it.
Yes, thank you for having us.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys, and have a great day.
You too. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
This podcast is executive produced by Maddie Kaiser and Wendy Donnan. The music is by Chris Shin. Thank you so much for joining us, everyone, and tune in next time.